Hello and welcome to this short summary on the 1997 Typhoon season. Starting as always with our summary, as we can see, a lot of tracks, typical for the West Pacific. This season saw 28 storms, a total of 16 typhoons, and 10 Category 5 equivalents. We saw 11 super typhoons. The super typhoon status, I have mentioned before in other videos, is only done by the JTWC, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, based in Hawaii, and is unofficial because it's not a it's essentially for the Saffir-Simpson scale, which is the category 1 through 5 hurricane that is used on the West Atlantic and the East Central Pacific, and is only for typhoons that have wind speeds greater than 150 miles an hour. I would like this a lot better if it was just category 5, but that's just me, because that means you can have a category 4 equivalent super typhoon, and that does lead to some confusion in my opinion, but I digress. This season saw a lot of storms, a lot of strong storms as well, because of a very strong El Nino that was in place. This led to the amount of storm numbers being increased on both sides of the Pacific. However, the 97 East and Central Pacific hurricane season is not as bad as the West Pacific was. The El Nino also thankfully steered many storms out and kept them at sea rather than potentially making landfall. In total, these storms all caused over $4.5 billion in damage. Keep in mind this is 1997 US dollars. Caused approximately 4,036 deaths and an unknown, although most likely in the thousands, of people injured. We start off with Tropical Storm Levi. Levi was also known as Bening in the Philippines, and started in practically the smack dab center of the South China Sea on May 23rd, and drifted surprisingly eastward instead of your typical westward track and then going eastward. On May 26th, Levi reached storm status after tracking across the Philippines and then started a north-northwest turn. Would reach maximum intensity 2 days later, on May 28th now, with winds of a whopping 51 miles per hour and an absolutely insane pressure of 992 millibars. Levi, despite just being a tropical storm, did kill 53 people and displaced 210,000. Levi's main claim here is the fact that it of course did not go westerly at all. From the very beginning, Levi tracked eastward, very similar to 1999's Hurricane Lenny, which I do have yet to talk about. Alright, actual typhoon. This is Super Typhoon Winnie, or Ibiang, in the Philippines. Winnie would first start on August 5th, just around near the Marshall Islands, would become storm strength 4 days later, so it took its time, and then did not take its time becoming a typhoon on August 10th. Winnie's eye is a record holder, or it is tied with another typhoon, I should say, with the widest recorded eye in tropical storm history, with an eye of around 370 kilometers wide. That is this typhoon picture here that is labeling Okinawa in the outer wall and the eye in the inner wall, and all those. This record is tied, like I said, with Typhoon Carmen of, I believe it's 65, but I do know it's the name is Carmen, and that typhoon had an eye of equal size, or roughly equal size. Winnie, despite all this, did in fact have a narrow eye at one point, but would in total affect 810,500 people in the Philippines, surprisingly, even though that is relatively far away, and it would dump 28 and 18 inches of rain on Taiwan and Japan, respectively. Winnie would make landfall as a minimal typhoon, so minimal hurricane equivalent, so around 74, 75 miles per hour, on China just south of Singapore on August 17th. Winnie was one of the worst storms for China in well over a decade. The storm surge in Shanghai, although Winnie was not necessarily at Shanghai, had reached 19 feet of storm surge. That is absolutely insane. In fact, after this storm, a, a storm surge wall was heightened to make sure that a storm surge like that would not breach it, because this storm wall was only inches away from being overtopped. Winnie, for the record, peaked at 160 miles per hour at 915 millibars on August 12th. I did not mention that until now just because there's a lot of stuff going on with Winnie. Winnie also caused an estimated $3.2 billion in damage and 372 deaths. Super Typhoon Ivan, not to be confused with 2004's Hurricane Ivan. Ivan was also called Narsing in the Philippines and was first named on October 13th and slowly gained intensity from this point as well, named being that Ivan became a storm on the 13th. Ivan then did not take its time becoming a typhoon on August 14th the next day. Ivan went from wind speeds of 120 miles per hour to winds of 165 miles per hour within, or rather say just a little bit over, I think it was 24 hours, which is very rapid intensification, although not the fastest. I believe right as of right now, Hurricane Patricia has the fastest. The fastest intensifying cyclone that I've covered. Although Typhoon Forest of 1983 is officially the fastest ever intensifying tropical cyclone the world has ever seen so far. And Ivan would go all the way up to 185 miles per hour on October 17th with a very low pressure of 905 millibars. Ivan landfell on the Philippines on the very, very northern tip of Luzon, I believe the northernmost Philippine island is. If I'm mistaken, I do apologize. With winds of 140 miles per hour, again on October 20th. And cause, according to Wikipedia, waist-deep flooding. Obviously, how far up your waist is depends on, well, your height. And if we're going to say that the worldwide average height is exactly 6 foot, then we're going to say that this flooding was exactly 3 feet. So, there you go. I could not, for the life of me, find an official number for how deep this flooding was. Wikipedia just said waist deep flooding, and other sources also said around the same thing. So, whatever. What I do know is that around 14,000 homes were also affected in some way, shape, or form. Ivan, despite being around a Category 4 on landfall, only killed 17 and caused $9.6 million in damage. Super Typhoon Paka is a very interesting typhoon. Was first labeled a hurricane as it developed in the Central Pacific, but then drifted out of the Central Pacific Basin on December 7th. Before this, though, Paka was up to a storm status on the 2nd, so at this point, Paka is still in the Central Pacific and is seen here as really, really trying to get it together, although, yes, it eventually would. You can see there in the photo of the Earth, not exactly looking the healthiest. However, Paka would achieve typhoon status on December 11th and quickly strengthened from here on out. We do see that it became a major hurricane with the dots here. Those are the darker yellow and even a category 4. Those are the orange dots there. Very early on, although lessened and then became a category 5. Paka peaked specifically on December 18th with a wind of 185 miles per hour at a pressure of 920 millibars. This bigger picture of Paka is Paka at maximum intensity. Paka would cause severe damage on Guam and Rota Islands. Paka damaged 70% of all homes in Aling Laplap or Alinga Laplap atoll, depending on where you're from or how you want to pronunciate it. Paka destroyed 1,500 homes in Guam and also caused a complete power outage for Guam. Despite this, Paka caused 0 deaths. There are 0 deaths attributed to Paka, which is very fortunate. Paka would go on to cause $580 million in damage, though. This season, as you can see again in the bottom right, was quite the very active season, to just put it a little lightly. It is tied with the number of super typhoons at first place, with 11, like I mentioned before. And you might think that 1964, the most active tropical cyclone season globally so far, would tie this, but it was actually 1965 that saw 11 super typhoons as well. So only 65 and 97 have had 11 super typhoons. Again, super typhoons are a unofficial categorization, so take that record as you will. We also know that, surprisingly, this season saw the very first recorded instance of 2 Category 5 equivalent storms happening at the same time in the West Pacific. I would have very easily assumed that this would have happened much earlier on in records, but no. These 2 storms, for the record, were Ivan and Joan. Going back to Ivan, the picture, that's one of the pictures there has Joan in it. Surprisingly, Paka would not be retired for the West Pacific, but for the Central Pacific Basin. This was the only storm name retired, if I'm not mistaken, in the 97 typhoon season. Technically not even in the typhoon season. But, you know. The biggest claim to fame of this season, however, is that it has the highest ever seasonal ace recorded. I would like to thank the Colorado State University for calculating the seasonal ace of the West Pacific, because I have not found another place that does so. In fact, I found ace by researching this video, and I would have legitimately gone without a West Pacific slide on my ace video if it were not for me doing a little bit more digging of this season. For the record, I mean, you can see it right there still, but this season had an ace of 570.4. Truly insane. Also surprisingly, is that Opal and Peter, two storms, is the first recorded instance of two storms landfalling on mainland Japan, specifically in the month of June. This has indeed happened other months, but not in June. 97 saw indeed two firsts and holds a first place as well. And that, folks, is it for the 97 Typhoon season. Quite the active one, and a record holder as well. Again, like I just said before, seeing two firsts. I hope that you all enjoyed this video and of course learned something as well. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.